Hey, what is up YouTube? I've decided to take a break from the champion guides and make a warding guide. This video is for top laners or for players who want to get familiar of where top laners might want to ward around. Most of these warding spots should be familiar, but I decided to put all of these into one video so it'll be easy for you guys to refer back to and to remind yourself whenever you need to. Hopefully you guys enjoy it, and the first part of the video is going to be warding on the blue side, and then after it will be on the red side. Before we get into it, I want to point out, as a top laner, with a pink ward and a yellow trinket, you cannot ward all possible areas where a jungler or an enemy champion may gank you, but you can judge the situation and ward common areas or areas depending on the behavior of the enemy team or the team comp. So let's get to it. Alright, so the first tip I want to give is that you should ward towards the edge of the brush. This is to give the most vision possible. I know it might sound straightforward, but I think there are a lot of players who don't do that. And here in this clip, I use normal cast to show you how far out you can actually ward, and it will still be registered as being in the brush. So normal cast on, if the cursor is blue, this means that the ward will not be in the brush, and once it turns green, then it will register in the brush, thus granting vision inside and outside of the brush. I play on quick cast, and I assume a lot of players do too, but this example is to show you how far out you can ward within the brush. Perhaps you might want to switch your trinket to normal cast or practice with smart cast. So in top lane, when you are around in the middle part of the lane or more towards the enemy side of the lane, you want to ward the brush in the river and the tri-brush. One thing I like to focus on is the position of the ward at the tri-brush. There is a difference in how much vision you can see past the tri-brush depending on where you ward. If you ward closer to the river, you see more of the river and less of the opponent's jungle. However, if you place your ward on the top right corner on the tri-brush, you can see both entrances to lane from the enemy jungle. And depending on how much north or east the ward is, determines how much you can see of the two potential entrances to the top lane from the red side of the map. You can see when I ward towards the Rift Herald, you see less of the top side of the lane which connects to the brush. And if you ward towards the right side of the tri-brush, you see more of the enemy jungle which is behind the Rift Herald. So to get the balance of vision of both areas, you want to ward around the top right part of the tri-brush. I know it may not seem that important, but if you can maximize your vision, then why not go for it? In terms of pink wards, you want to pink ward where it is less likely that the ward will be destroyed. Yes, both of the locations mentioned so far are common, but if you are the laner who is pushing top, it is better to pink the brush in the river, since the most likely route the enemy jungle will take is through the tri-brush. Another option to pink ward is locations which are not that common, thus making it less likely that the jungler will notice it and destroy it. Another place to ward other than the brush in the river is to the left of where the Rift Herald pit is, as shown in the clip. Note this ward placement down because this ward shows vision of entrance to your team's blue buff. So if the enemy jungler was to use the blast cone and try to gank top, yes, a ward in the brush will spot the enemy jungler, but this ward will do that sooner, and it helps track the enemy jungler if they are counter jungling or if they try to dive you, and perhaps the enemy jungler could hug the right side of the blue jungle entrance, which may not be under vision if you warded the river brush. So keep this ward placement in mind, it may be useful and save your jungler. Okay, so now let's talk about deeper vision. So in this clip, I've placed the pink ward as if your mid laner or your jungler placed it. Just to make it clear, you shouldn't place this pink ward at this brush as a top laner. So there are two spots where you can place a ward. One is the brush which connects to the red buff. This gives you information if the enemy jungler is doing a buff, if they are coming towards the blast cone, and if they pass the ward. The mid laner's pink ward does not show where exactly the enemy jungler went, but if he did go mid, it will be shown by the pink ward. So from that information, you can assume the jungler could be ganking top. It may not always be the case, they could blast cone and do another jungle camp, but if you have vision here, it can give you a good estimation of where the enemy jungler can be. The second spot you can ward is the brush opposite the enemy red buff. This grants almost the same vision, except now you can see if the enemy jungler is walking to Krugs or going to gank you. These ward placements are situational, and perhaps you might want to do this if your champion isn't so mobile, or if the enemy jungler is a fast champion such as Rammus. Or you could use this vision to beta gank or beta counter gank from your jungler. There's a lot that you can do with this vision. Also, bear in mind that it may not be wise to run away as soon as you see the enemy jungler. If the opponents notice that behavior, the enemy jungler will assume that you have deep vision, which could lead to them using their red trinket to track it and deny the vision. So your behavior in lane can give away about what you know in terms of tracking the enemy jungler. These two ward spots are for when you are around the center and towards the enemy side of the lane if you are pushing. Now let's look into the warding spots if you are being pushed and you are farming under turret. One ward placement that you can do is to ward outside of your blue buff entrance. You may think, why not ward the brush in the river? The reason is that the ward in the brush in the river does not show the vision of the right side of the blue buff entrance. This could be key because perhaps the enemy jungler could hug that side of the wall and deny you knowing where they are. This may not always be the case, but it's good to know in case your enemy jungler knows how to utilize the Fog of War. Another ward placement is inside the brush in the river. This one is pretty straightforward and common. The enemy jungler could use the ability to get over the wall, and if you didn't ward the brush, you may not see the enemy jungler. So this is a safe place to ward. Another place to ward is a tri-brush next to your turret. You can ward the brush, and if someone is going to gank you from the side, you will definitely know. But the problem with this ward placement is that by the time the enemy is in that brush, it's basically too late to do much about it. If you run away, they can chase you. If you stay, you can get dove on. Another place to ward is the lane brush closest to your turret. If you are pushed in lane, a lane gank could happen since the enemy would assume that you didn't ward the brush. If you can ward the middle brush, that's even better because the enemy might bait you to push and the enemy jungler may not be in the first brush closest to your turret, but if you cannot safely ward the middle brush, then just ward the first brush and don't push. Okay, now that we got those out of the way, there are two tips which I want to mention. One is that you can ward the brush in the river from your lane as shown in the clip. You have to stand where I am standing in the clip and ward at the edge of the branch as shown in the demonstration. I don't really see this being practical, but it's good to know. It is better to ward the edge of the brush, which gives you more vision anyway. Another tip is that you can ward over the Rift Herald pit to the tri-brush. Again, I don't see this being practical unless you are a champion like Jax or Lee Sin and you may want to get out of a situation if you are trapped in the pit. But in terms of warding and getting vision, I do not recommend this placement. Alright, so that was a lot of ward placements from the blue side. Now let's talk about the red side. And yes, there are less ward placements, but that's just because of the design of the map. So the vision is almost mirrored for red side, but because the tri-brush is now closer to you, it is better to pink the tri-brush and use your trinket at the river brush. The same rule applies, which is to ward the top right corner of the tri-brush to maximize vision. For deep vision, you could ward either opposite the blue buff as shown in the clip. This can show you when the enemy jungler is doing the blue buff and can show you roughly where the enemy jungler is going. It can give away if they're exiting the blue side of the jungle or if they're going to wolves. The next ward placement is the same but in the brush next to blue buff. This gives you a little bit more information whether the enemy jungler perhaps goes to top lane or goes for a lane gank, or if they're going towards the right side of the map. I prefer to ward in the brush of the blue buff since it gives more information and an earlier warning of where the enemy jungler is. You would want to place this ward if you are in the middle or more towards the enemy side of the lane where you are pushing. This ward placement is good if you are pressuring and you can have enough time to react if the enemy jungler wants to gank you. Again, this is situational and may not be useful against most champs, but can be useful against some champs who can gank a lane very quickly, or if you want to just keep track of where the enemy jungler is. Alright, so next we're going to look into ward placements if you are pushed and you have to farm under tower. In that situation, it is best to either pink ward the tri-brush and trinket the brush in lane closest to you, and if you can, perhaps the middle brush if it's safe enough to do so. Another option is that you can pink the brush behind your red buff, as shown in the clip, and ward the tri-brush. This will give you information if the enemy mid laner is roaming and can buy you time to get away if you cannot survive a dive. But remember, your mid laner or your jungler should ward this brush. But if your team is not warding, then you might want to ward here. One more ward placement, which is situational for red side, is where the blast cone is for blue side. You can either ward the brush, which could be useful if you are planning to dive the enemy champion, but this does not show the blast cone, so it could mean that the enemy jungler could use the blast cone to get into the brush in the river and your ward will not pick that up. Another option is to ward outside of the brush next to the blast cone. This will guarantee you knowing if the enemy jungler is going to gank you, and these two ward placements are very situational for champions like Kayn or Zac, where they can gank from this area. Like I said in the beginning, There are typical ward spots such as Tri-Brush and River Brush, but there are also situational ones depending on if you are being pushed or if you are the one pushing. I hope this guide is useful to you and I hope this helps you with your warding. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. I will probably do other versions of this for mid lane or bot lane, etc. depending on how the feedback is for this video. But thank you guys for watching, please share this video, like it, subscribe and stay tuned for more videos.